Okay, we are going to begin the 4.10 lesson Demanding Change. The first major victory for civil rights activists came in 1954 with the Supreme Court's decision to overturn the doctrine of separate but equal in public education. It was quickly evident, however, that the road to desegregation would be a long and difficult one. Despite massive resistance by many Southern whites to integrate society, courageous individuals acted. They demanded admission to universities, service at department store lunch counters, and the right to peacefully gather and protest. And in Montgomery, Alabama, a young minister by the name of Martin Luther King Jr. first gained national prominence. Goals for this lesson: recognize the techniques used to achieve integration of the Montgomery Bus Company, give examples of techniques used to demand civil rights and examples of massive resistance by whites, and analyze the words of Martin Luther King Jr.'s words to summarize his philosophies and goals. Don't forget to go to your lesson resources and get your reading guide and or lesson answer key. And we shall begin with reading pages 809 through 818. Okay. Let's read the Death of Mississippi inset before we begin the rest of the reading. In the summer of 1955, Emmett Till, a black 14-year-old from Chicago, went to Tallahatchie County, Mississippi to visit relatives. Not accustomed to the South's rigid racial code, he apparently flirted with a young white woman in a grocery store, though accounts of what he said or did remain disputed. The woman told her husband, and 3 days later Till's mangled body was pulled out of a river. Emmett's mother had her son's body brought back home to Chicago. Despite the grisly appearance of his corpse, she insisted on an open casket viewing at the funeral, so the world would know what her son had suffered. Newspapers published photographs of Till's mangled, lying form in the casket. Thousands came to pay their respects during the 4-day viewing. A few weeks after the murder, a trial took place in Mississippi. An eyewitness, the boy's great uncle, identified the killers, but an all-white jury took little more than an hour to acquit the two defendants, who later admitted to killing Till. The verdict in the widely publicized trial sparked outrage across the United States and helped fuel growing pressure for black civil rights. The Montgomery bus boycott. In Montgomery, Alabama, on the evening of Thursday, December 1st, 1955, Rosa Parks sank into the seat in the first row of the colored section on a crowded bus. A few stops later, the driver told Mrs. Parks to give her seat to a white man. Exhausted after a long day at work, Rosa Parks told the driver no. "If you don't stand up," the driver said, "I'm going to have you arrested." Mrs. Parks thought a moment. "Go on," she said, "and have me arrested." She was not the first, even in Montgomery, to defy the rules enforcing white privilege on Southern buses, but her simple act touched off a cascade of events that would sweep the South. In later years, legend would have it that Rosa Parks was a simple elderly woman whose act of defiance was motivated only by fatigue. In fact, she was a longtime activist with the local NAACP branch and had recently attended a workshop on nonviolent resistance at the Highlander Folk School, a training center for civil rights and labor organizers. Years earlier, Parks had a run-in with the same bus driver. What was different about December 1955? In the post-war, post-Brown era, many Southern blacks like Rosa Parks were no longer willing to wait for their rights. They were ready to act. The arrest of Rosa Parks provided an opportunity for action. The president of the local NAACP, E.D. Nixon, and Joanne Robinson, head of the Women's Political Council of Montgomery, called for a one-day boycott of the city buses. A network of black ministers backed the idea. When the one-day boycott drew a huge response, the organizers decided to extend it indefinitely. They hoped to put financial pressure on the city and compel it to change its discriminatory practices. E.D. Nixon proposed the young minister of Montgomery's Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., act as a spokesman. The son of a prominent Atlanta clergyman, King was a graduate of Morehouse College, a respected black institution. He earned a doctorate in theology from Boston University. In the course of his studies, King had become deeply interested in the social gospel movement, particularly its mission to make the world a better place in the here and now. He also studied the life and works of Gandhi, and like Gandhi, came to believe in the use of nonviolent civil disobedience. With King at the helm, the city's black leaders formed the Montgomery Improvement Association. To help perpetuate the bus boycott, black church members and women's groups set up carpools. The bus line lost 65% of its riders. The Montgomery Improvement Association, in the name of 4 black women, filed suit against Montgomery's bus system as unconstitutional. The city's whites struck back, but boycott organizers were fired from their jobs. King was arrested for allegedly speeding. In January 1956, his home was bombed, but no one was hurt. When the boycott's leaders, including King, were arrested for hindering a business without just cause, King responded, "If we are arrested every day, if we are exploited every day, if we are trampled over every day, don't ever let anyone pull you so low as to hate them. We must use the weapon of love. We must have understanding and compassion for those who hate us." As the boycott proceeded for weeks and then months, the press reported it all, drawing waves of support and donations from around the world. Finally, in December 1956, the U.S. Supreme Court struck down Alabama's requirement of segregation on buses. On December 21st, the 381-day bus boycott ended. King boarded a bus and sat in the front, next to a white man. It was a stunning victory for the boycott's organizers. The Montgomery bus boycott showed what might be accomplished by blacks taking concerted action to secure their rights. With their growing population in cities like Montgomery, African Americans could exert economic pressure on white businesses. A new generation of African Americans, including war veterans and men who worked on desegregated military bases outside Montgomery, was willing to demand and work for equality. From the Montgomery bus boycott, King emerged as a national leader in the growing movement for civil rights. In January 1957, King and his allies formed a new organization, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the SCLC, with King as its president. The SCLC prepared to take throughout the South the nonviolent tactics that had worked in Montgomery. Confrontation in Little Rock. While African Americans in Montgomery waged their long boycott, white Southerners elsewhere kept up their resistance to the Supreme Court's ruling in Brown v. Board of Education. As part of the campaign of massive resistance, whites often simply stalled any efforts to integrate, forcing black parents and the NAACP to file hundreds of local lawsuits to enforce the desegregation ruling. Some school districts assigned children to all white or all black schools for phony reasons other than race. Some districts fired teachers who taught mixed classes. President Dwight D. Eisenhower disliked the Brown decision and would not ask Southerners to comply with it. "You cannot change people's hearts by law," he said, but soon he was forced to act. In the fall of 1957, Arkansas Governor Orville Fabius defied a federal court order to enroll 9 black students in Little Rock Central High School. Fabius, who had insisted he could not maintain order if forcible integration is carried out, stationed National Guard troops at the school's main door to bar the black students. Again, the federal court issued its order to integrate the high school. Fabius withdrew the guardsmen, leaving the students to enter Central High through a hate-driven mob, whipped to a fury by the governor's own resistance. Eisenhower, appalled by the disgraceful occurrences, sent 1,000 members of the Army's 101st Airborne Division to disperse the mob and allow the black students to enter the school. Armed soldiers stayed in the school for a year to keep the peace. However unwillingly, the president had insisted that the South must give up its massive resistance and obey the law. And here's a picture of the Little Rock Nine going into school. And you can see just the faces of the women and the people behind just the pure hatred and violence that they faced trying to be the first ones to integrate that school. Sit-ins and freedom rides. In 1960, despite local successes such as the Montgomery bus boycott, segregation remained nearly pervasive as ever. Young black Americans, more impatient than their elders, inspired by leaders like Martin Luther King Jr., took up more confrontational tactics. On July 31, 1960, at a Woolworth store in Greensboro, North Carolina, 4 black college students bought toothpaste and other items and then took stools to the lunch counter and ordered coffee. When the white waitresses informed them, "I'm sorry, but we don't serve colored here," one of the young men, Franklin McCain, responded, "You just serve me at a counter 2 feet away. Why is it that you serve me at one counter and deny me at another?" The 4 stayed until closing and returned the next day. Dozens, then hundreds, then thousands joined the wave of sit-ins at segregated lunch counters across the South. Idealistic white students also joined the protests. By the summer of 1961, some 70,000 whites and blacks had participated in lunch counter sit-ins. The simple request for coffee at a lunch counter became a symbol of the students' rejection of, as one put it, the whole stigma of being inferior. Freedom Riders. In the spring of 1961, James Farmer, director of the Congress for Racial Equality, decided to revive the spirit of the 1947 Journey of Reconciliation, in which Corps volunteers rode buses across the South to test the Supreme Court's ban on segregation on interstate transportation. For this new freedom ride, as the journey was called, a group of both black and white Corps volunteers boarded 2 buses in Washington, D.C. and headed south to New Orleans. They wanted to test a recent Supreme Court ruling banning segregation on interstate bus and rail stations. In Rock Hill, South Carolina, 2 riders were beaten, one for trying to use a whites-only restroom. Worse violence lay ahead. When they reached Anniston, Alabama, one bus was attacked by a white mob. Angry whites, including local Ku Klux Klan members, shouted insults, broke windows, and slashed the tires. When the local police finally arrived, they engaged in friendly chat with the mob and then waved the bus to move on. The bus, followed by the white mob, did not get far before flat tires forced it to stop. Some in the mob threw a firebomb into the bus. As the smoke and flames spread, the Freedom Riders scrambled to escape from the bus. As they lay choking on the ground, suffering from smoke inhalation, many were beaten by the white mob. When a fuel tank exploded, the mob pulled back. The Freedom Riders, injured but alive, were taken to a nearby hospital where most were refused care. Local authorities arrested none of the mob. The other bus was stopped in Birmingham, where Freedom Riders were hauled out and beaten. As the national media reported the violence against the Freedom Riders, public sympathy grew for their cause. A new group, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, was determined to press on with the Freedom Rides. Diane Nash, a founding member of SNCC, declared, "We can't let them stop us with violence. If we do, the movement is dead." Nash and her colleagues hastily organized a second Freedom Ride. The bus went from Birmingham to Montgomery, Alabama, where police did nothing to stop white thugs from attacking the riders. Several Freedom Riders were severely injured, including John Lewis, a young student who would soon become chairman of SNCC and later be elected as congressman from Georgia. More riders pressed on to Jackson, Mississippi. They were met by police and National Guardsmen who arrested and jailed the riders when they tried to enter a whites-only facility at the bus station. Newspapers around the world pointed out the contrast between the American ideals and the shameful spectacles of Mississippi and Alabama. In Washington, President John F. Kennedy and his brother Robert, the Attorney General, had been watching the rising violence with distress. They sympathized with the efforts of the Freedom Riders, but called for moderation, precisely what the young activists were rejecting. JFK, who needed the support of Southern legislatures to pass his domestic agenda, feared that a federal showdown with local authorities would hurt his already shaky standing in the South. But the brutality in Alabama demanded a response. The Kennedys sent federal marshals to protect the Freedom Riders, but did not intervene when police later arrested the riders. And here's a picture of the burning bus. Throughout the summer of 1961, both SNCC and CORE organized dozens more Freedom Rides. Some African American leaders echoed the Kennedys' pleas for moderation and urged a focus on registering black voters rather than direct action. SNCC did register thousands of new black voters, but also kept up the Freedom Rides, with media attention growing as students from around the country rode into Mississippi and invited arrest. Many advocates for black civil rights were in no mood to accept moderation, especially when confronted by proclamations like that made by Alabama Governor George Wallace, who vowed to uphold segregation today, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever. James Meredith and University of Mississippi. And here's a picture of James Meredith and trying to get into the university there. On January 29, 1961, James Meredith, an African American and Air Force veteran, wrote a letter to Thurgood Marshall of the NAACP. Meredith was determined to integrate at the all-white University of Mississippi. In his letter, Meredith explained to Marshall that he was applying to the university and noted, "I anticipate encountering some type of difficulty." That proved to be a great understatement. Meredith was refused admission. The NAACP brought suit against the university. As a result, the federal court agreed that Meredith had been denied admission because of his race. The court ordered the University of Mississippi to enroll James Meredith. Mississippi segregationist governor Ross Barnett was dead set against obeying the court order. He sent secret state police to prevent Meredith from entering the university. On October 1962, the Kennedy administration sent federal troops to the campus to guarantee Meredith's safety. Riots broke out. White students stormed university administration buildings. Federal marshals tried to hold them back with clubs and tear gas. In the rioting, 2 people were killed, including a visiting French journalist, and hundreds injured. In the end, Meredith did succeed in enrolling as the first African American student at the University of Mississippi, an event that assumed a tremendous symbolic significance within the civil rights movement. And we'll stop this video here and begin again with Birmingham, Confrontation and Consequences.